Hello, and welcome to our 7th Chalk Talk in our series on Agile data integration. Now that we've gone through the steps of finding the data sources and targets, profiling the data to understand where there may be some issues, doing some joint analysis, applying some data quality rules and business rules, and defining the mapping specification between the source and target, determining the overall project scope and impact analysis, what is the fastest way to deploy this to production? Well, typically it all begins with the developer taking the mapping specification document that the analyst has created and translating that into some mapping logic. If they're using PowerCenter, it's in the visual mapping logic language. This step here between the developer and the analyst can be pretty time consuming. Remember, the analyst typically may have created this document using an Excel spreadsheet, and so it's open to interpretation, and there's a lot of back and forth going on in terms of creating some mapping logic, creating the output so that the analyst can verify it, getting clarification between the analyst and the developer. The developer needs to make all the necessary changes to the affected objects, perform some unit testing, and this can be time consuming in and of itself, in terms of running the mapping logic, looking at the output, manually inspecting it to see if it's the expected results, going back to the analyst to confirm that it is meeting the business requirements, and then the analyst also needs to work closely with QAs, as does development, to make sure that QA is getting the right test coverage, testing the right things in order to get the expected results. And the business user, of course, needs to do their acceptance testing to make sure it's meeting their requirements. All of this interaction between the developer, the analyst, QA, and the business is quite manually intensive. There's a lot of back and forth in terms of email exchanges and meetings and so on. And unfortunately, the business in this as-is process has had to wait quite a bit of time before they actually see any results and can actually validate or confirm that it does or does not meet their business requirements. And if it doesn't, unfortunately, you may need to go back several steps, either find some other data sources or redefine the mapping specification and go through this process once again. There is quite a bit of non-value added activity here that I believe can be either eliminated or certainly reduced. First off, if the analyst can automatically generate the mapping logic based on the specification, this gives the developer a tremendous head start. Using Informatica, you have a unified development environment for both data integration and data quality. And so you can also reuse any data integration and data quality rules that have been created directly within a single development environment because it's all built on a central repository. And you can also do comparative profiling as part of your unit testing to compare steps within the mapping logic both before and after to see if the transformations are having the intended effect. The analyst can verify the results of the logic directly within that Informatica analyst tool. Remember, the developer is creating these rules between the source and target. The analyst, because it's on a central repository, can go into their browser-based tools and verify the results. And then it's important to be able to deploy this as quickly as possible to the business so they can see and verify the results for themselves and speed up the iterations between these different steps. And then finally, Informatica provides you the ability to automatically compare actual results with expected results so that you can perform your system testing rapidly. At this point, I think it's important to also emphasize the role of a good data architecture for Agile data integration. Specifically, data virtualization with adaptive data services provides the flexibility and agility that's required to build and design what's needed quickly. How do we do this? Well, let's start from the bottom and work our way up here. We recognize that there's data silos and we need to get data from multiple places. Using Informatica, you can build out a business-friendly data abstraction layer, we'll call it a data virtualization layer, consisting of these adaptive data services. They're adaptive in the sense that they can support all projects based on what's needed. And they do that by implementing the policies per the SLAs of both IT and the business in terms of how to access the data, the level of quality, when and how to retain the data, what data needs to be masked per data privacy regulations, and how fresh should the data be. That is, does it need to be delivered in real time, near real time, or is batch mode sufficient? And does the project and applications require the data to be delivered through ODBC and JDBC if you want to access it through SQL, through a web service, or through a batch ETL process such as through PowerCenter? Now, if we take the mapping specification that was created earlier by the analyst, we can generate the mapping logic to give the developer a head start. And not only that, the developer can use this as what I'll call a read map to feed a logical data object that can be accessed through that data virtualization layer and deliver the data in any way, whether it's through SQL, a web service, or a batch ETL process. This mapping logic can be extended to include other ETL transformations or data quality rules or consume web services, and can also include data masking transformations, as we saw the analyst use when they created the specification. Now let's take a closer look at how this is done. Here we see the mapping logic that was generated from the mapping specification. And the developer is going to go in and add a transformation to consume a web service to get some more information. Essentially, bring in the store name and zip code based on a store ID. So the developer has been given a tremendous head start. The mapping has already been defined, and all they needed to do was add this one web service in between the mapping. And now the developer can preview the results and see the changes to the mapping logic. Now that the developer has completed the mapping logic, they can deploy it as a SQL view, as a web service, or as a batch ETL process to PowerCenter. In other words, you can design and build the mapping once and deploy it in many different ways. This saves a tremendous amount of time, and in fact, it gets the data to the business fast. The developer can quickly unit test their mapping logic by using comparative profiling. Essentially, they select two points within the mapping logic and run what's called comparative profiling, all directly within the developer tool. This can compare values, compare patterns, and compare statistics of the data. And then you can test your data integration implementation by using the data validation option to compare the actual results with the expected results. The way this works is you create your data integration tests, and in some cases you can automatically create or generate these tests, run them automatically, and the dashboard will show you some green and red light indicators, the red obviously indicating those tests that failed. You can select that test and then view which rows have failed, and it'll show you the values and you can see exactly why it's failing. Let's take a closer look at comparative profiling. Here is a mapping within the developer tool. We're going to select 2 points and compare the results in between. So we see here the 2 transformations. We run the comparative profiling and we can compare the results. We see here the comparisons of the values, of the patterns, and this gives us an idea of whether the transformation at each step is having the intended effect. And that concludes our 7th Chalk Talk in our series on Agile data integration. Thank you.